You're now listening to Emily Shields Talk with Substance on Hotline. Radio Jamaica, active for the good of our nation.
Thank you. Thank you, listeners, for joining us. We're happy to have you. It's the 4th September 2025. Wherever in the world you join us from, we know that you have choices. We're happy when you come here. Happier when you find reasons to stay. This is the Hotline.
Emily's views, her position on the issues, her point of view backed up by the facts. Here are Emily's views.
So last evening into early this morning, we witnessed the 19th general election since universal adult suffrage, which brought an historic moment for the Jamaica Labour Party, which has for the first time since contested elections from 1970s actually, it won from 1944, it won a third consecutive term in office. And it did so, not unexpectedly so, with a reduced majority. The preliminary count as at last night, 34-29. The final count will be underway in the various divisions across the island commencing today, and we do hope to touch base at the appropriate time and to hear from the Electoral Office of Jamaica as the final count takes place in the constituencies. As you know, the count last evening was a preliminary count, and a final count is to take place, and perhaps to a magisterial recount. There is a lot to unpack coming on the results of last evening, and needless to say, I haven't even had the chance of properly digesting what has happened. But what I do know is there are many takeaways from the results of last evening. The 2020 election result brought a landslide for the Jamaica Labour Party. And in a way, it was somewhat unnatural and abnormal within the context of our electoral history. In fact, but I did expect from, I think, 1989, when the PNP won 52-8, at that time we had 60 seats. And I think in 1997, again, by my count, PNP has been the party to have had those large wins, except in 1980, when we know what took place that led to the JLP winning 51 to the PNP's then 9. But even so, in recent times, I think we've had a sort of more even parliament, contrary to the one we had in 2020. So there was bound to be, at some point in time, in my view, a rebalancing of the scales just a little bit. But on top of the rebalancing of the scales, there are some stories that are being written about the role of performance in some constituencies that leaned in a particular way. But when you have a hard-working candidate who, I suppose the people could see that the candidate is trying and getting some results, then there are people who are willing to give the person the nod to continue doing the work that they've started. And one of the big wins last evening, I believe, came from central Manchester, in Rhoda Moore Crawford's holding on to that seat, going up against Donovan Mitchell. You may recall that in 2020, she defeated Peter Bunting, and the thinking was that there were forces on the ground that had some disaffection with Peter Bunting's candidacy in the constituency, and as such, that perhaps led to her winning in 2020. But look at what has happened in 2025. Rhoda Moore Crawford defeated Donovan Mitchell, who was the campaign manager for Peter Bunting in 2020, he knows all of the strategies that Bunting used and didn't succeed, but yet still she held on in that seat. Look as well in North Trelawney, a long-standing seat for the People's National Party, where Tova Hamilton held on there to ward off a challenge for Wickham McNeil. There is a story to be told about whatever work goes on the ground that will perhaps change the innate and the conventional thinking of some of the people in the constituency. Yeah? So there are little pockets. I don't know what you take away, and I'd love to hear from you this morning, some of the things that jump out at you readily and the others that need to be studied, right? But there's one thing I want to have a little look at this morning. It came up on the set last evening because people are in the habit of coming with this argument about minority government. Numbers usually have some correlation. One set of numbers has a correlation with another set of numbers. And I've been fascinated too with the talk of low voter turnout in the elections when you plot the charts from 1944 coming all the way up to 2025. And in fact, the Gleaner this morning has something on its front page where it gives you the voter turnout from 1962 all the way to 2025. And you will see that except for 1983, when that was an uncontested general election, the two election cycles that had the lowest voter turnout, there are 2020, which is the COVID year, and 2025, which is the one that went by yesterday. Let me take a break and come back with you.
At the Ministry of Finance and the Public
Percentages out there, and I can't argue with the percentages. But there is something else that strikes me about these numbers. And I decided, let me go back to all the way to 44 and look at the numbers of electors on the list, the percentage of voter turnout, and also the number of votes that each of the two major political parties got in the election. I'm not going to go all the way back to 44 now, but I will tell you this. In 1993, when the PNP won 52 to 8. The number of electors on the list was 2,599. The voter turnout was 60.28%. Of that 60.28%, the PNP, which won the election, they had 401,131 people voting for the PNP. The JLP had 263,711. 1993 that. 1997, when there were 1,182,294 electors on the list, the turnout was 65%. The PNP got 429,805. The JLP 297,387. In 2002, when there was 1.3 million electors on the list, with a turnout of 59%, the PNP, who won the election, they got 396,371, and the JLP got 360,468. September 2007, the list moved up to 1,336,307 electors. The JLP won that, 3228. The number of people who voted for the PNP, 405,293, and for the JLP, 410,438. For the December 2011 election, I'll get those official numbers of the number of electors on the list for you soon because I didn't find it. But the PNP, they won that election. 464,064 people voted for the PNP, and for the JLP, 405,920. 2016, when the JLP won that 32-31, there was 1,824,412 electors on the list. The PNP had 433,735 voting for the PNP. The JLP 436,972. 2020, which is the landslide anomaly, the COVID year, there was 1.9 million electors on the list, and the PNP had 306,034 people who voted for the PNP, the JLP 408,292. I don't know the exact numbers yet for last evening, and we're going to get that. But it seems to me that on average, whether the voter turnout is in the high 70s or in the low 60s or in the mid 60s, it seems to me that we are at a crescendo of votes for the winning party coming up roughly to be about 435,000 thereabouts. And this is not quite unlike even the period when we had higher voter turnout, such as in 1976 or even in 1972. You have a higher voter turnout, but you also had a lot less people on the voters list. I don't know when the re-verification exercise is supposed to be done, but it strikes me as being extremely fascinating that we have seen since 1989 or since 1993 a consistently high jump in the number of electors on the voters list. And in fact, as I said, between 2007 and 2016, I'm going to get the numbers for 2011, there is about 400,000 people who were added to the voters list. So I think until we get a word from the Electoral Office of Jamaica about the state of the list and whether they are able to embark on a re-verification exercise, we may actually find ourselves in a position where the list is at a level now numerically that it is going to be near impossible to approximate to the high voter turnout of the 1980 election or 1976 before it, which had about 85.2%, if the list remains as large as it is. There are people who have perhaps left the jurisdiction and who will never come back, and the re-verification exercise perhaps has not been done or not sufficiently done, and they remain on the list. I don't know how many people who are dead are actually there or how easy it is to call the list for people who are dead. But what I know for sure is that the electronic voting identification system that is now available is intending to help with ensuring that the person who turns up to vote is the person whose name is actually there. There were some problems with that system in a number of constituencies yesterday, and from all accounts, that is part of the reason why there was a hold-up, on top of the fact that some people showed up without their electoral card, as I did, and had to be sworn to have the process completed, and that did take up a little bit more time, right? But I just find that if we use the numbers as there are now on the lists, then we will consistently form the view that it is perhaps a minority government. But when you look at the comparison with the actual numerical outcome with previous elections that had a higher voter turnout by virtue of the number of electors on the list, you will find that the number of people who vote for the political party that wins, it is hovering in the same ballpark. And probably that's the max. I don't know. Yeah? Coming out of last evening, it is very clear to me that this parliamentary term for Andrew Holness and his team will be one of the most difficult parliamentary terms, perhaps in modern history. The decision of the electorate to have the count the way that it is, it means that the opposition is now peopled twice the number it had post 2020 plus one, and it means that there will be greater voices of dissent on the opposition benches. I don't know if the vote of the people should be read that they want dissent or greater reaching across, greater consultation with the opposition in this term, and for the opposition to, you disagree, but you don't turn over the entire apple cart. And I think the quicker the two parties read and properly understand the signals being sent by the electorate, the better will be the fortunes of the parties in the next election. This shouldn't be read as a decision for any of the two to be puffed up, because there are some seats that should have been clawed back by the PNP in this election by virtue of the historical antecedents of that seat. And they really didn't walk back into the PNP line. So what message is actually being sent there? Yeah, the matter out of East Portland as well, that is become a bit of a inexplicable scenario for a lot of people. And I look forward to hearing from the people in Portland Eastern about what happened, because a traditional PNP seat it is, held over the years by many stalwarts. The last person holding it, Dr. Linville Bloomfield, who, having died a murder case, I think, quite known to a lot of people, having seen some of the reports in the newspapers. And Anne-Marie Vaz coming in that seat, the view was that Anne-Marie Vaz, she seemed to have been working the ground, seemed to have been there, doing a lot for the people. And Isaac Buchanan, who went into the seat, and a lot of people didn't expect that Isaac Buchanan would take that seat away from the hardworking Anne-Marie Vaz. So the introspection will have to happen in Portland Eastern, certainly for the Jamaica Labour Party, to try and figure out why is it that a central Manchester, Rhoda Moy Crawford, could hold on in that seat. Why could Tova Hamilton hold on in North Trelawney, but Portland Eastern, where Anne-Marie Vaz was seemingly doing a lot of work, a theory that was developing throughout the night based on what was happening in those two constituencies, and even in a way in central Kingston, because Steve McGregor held that preliminarily by only 12, and we'll see what happens in the magisterial recount. Why is it that Portland Eastern went to the newcomer, Isaac Buchanan? Yeah, a lot of lessons, but what is sure now is that Andrew Holness has defeated 3 last leaders of the People's National Party. He defeated Mrs. Sims Miller in 2016, Dr. Phillips in 2020, and now Mark Golding. It must have taken an awful lot for that to happen, and we see how he manages now in his 3rd term with a parliament with the makeup as it is at the moment.
Join us next time for Emily's Views